Colombian teachers begin a 48-hour strike with demands for President Ivan Duque. South Africa's president hits out against the country's last apartheid-era leader.
Not only because it's correctly and clearly...
And carnival events are underway around Brazil as Rio's samba bands prepare to showcase social justice within their performances. Hello and welcome to Telesur. I'm Doris following Quito, and this is From the South. Carnival events are underway around Brazil, and this year's samba bands are expected to celebrate with a particularly social justice themed twist. Brian Mier has more for us from Copacabana Beach in Rio de Janeiro.
Carnival is about to kick off here in Rio de Janeiro, and this year is going to prove to be one of the most politicized carnivals in the history of the city. Now, historically, the street block parties have a lot of political satire and criticism, but the main event, which takes place in the Sapucaí Stadium in downtown Rio de Janeiro, the main samba parades haven't been that political because they depend on money from the city and state governments to pay for their lavish floats and things like that. But the political situation has deteriorated so much in Brazil since the 2016 coup. It's become impossible for these favela-based samba groups to avoid talking about politics. And one of the biggest controversies this year is being promised by Mangueira, one of the oldest and most traditional groups in the city. They're going to pay tribute during their carnival parade to a black Jesus Christ who comes from a favela, who fights against oppression and fights against authoritarianism. Now, this has drawn the ire of all kinds of right-wing evangelical Christian and Catholic groups in Brazil. They're trying to spread fake news through the social media, accusing Mangueira of celebrating a drug trafficking Christ, which is a lie. And other big samba groups are also making a lot of protests. Portela, which is one of the most traditional groups in Rio de Janeiro, is going to pay tribute to the Tupinambá indigenous tribe, which was the first tribe that was here before the colonists arrived in the 1500s, under the theme of no captain, no bishop. Now, when they say no captain, they're referring to former army captain, far-right President Jair Bolsonaro. And when they refer to a bishop, they're referring to the Mayor Crivella, who's a bishop in the evangelical Universal Kingdom of God Church. The song is about how the indigenous people should not have to bow to any authority figure, any captain, any bishop. And these are just 2 of 10 political parades that are going to take place on Saturday and Sunday night here in Rio de Janeiro for a television audience estimated of above 30 million. It's going to be a major act of rebellion against rising fascism in Brazil.
Carnival, not just an opportunity to party, but also to protest and make a political statement, according to our correspondent, Brian Mier. Now, the 31st Intersessional Meeting of CARICOM Heads of Government has ended in Barbados with a resolution to improve integration and overcome disparities among the 15 member states. The 2-day conference saw leaders discuss their response to the coronavirus outbreak, the elimination of taxes for transport and trade, as well as proposed fixed roaming rates for the region. They also deliberated on a potential Caribbean-African forum. CARICOM Chair Mia Motley expressed that evening out the inequalities between the poorer and richer members would be a pillar of true integration.
One of the problems that has bedeviled the community for some time has been the issue of the CARICOM Development Fund. And we recognize, as I've said over and over, that in any single market, a single economy, there are winners and there are losers. And it is to that extent that Chapter 7 of the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas speaks to the issue of there being need for a fund to be able to assist disadvantaged countries, disadvantaged sectors, disadvantaged regions. Member states have committed to capitalizing this fund, but this will never be enough to do what needs to be done, particularly with all of the challenges that the region faces at this point in time. Yesterday I outlined a number of them, and we keep seeing new challenges, as we did with the COVID-19 virus. And to that extent, therefore, we feel strongly that we need to revisit the structure of the CARICOM Development Fund and to enable it to be able to raise additional funds, whether from individuals, companies, institutions, regional countries, and extra-regional countries. So my friends, I hope that we will appreciate that this policy decision taken by heads of government will make that a significant difference, and it will come back to us in the near future. We've agreed that to have 2 meetings a year only is not going to advance the work of the community. And perhaps that is one of the most significant results of this meeting, that we have accepted that we will try to meet at least once a month, even if we do the intervening meetings by means of the technology that connects us. Last year we were able to use the technology in order to bring heads of government together on a number of key issues. It worked extremely well for us, and we believe that this can now be a part of our normal business.
In a tweet, Cuba's foreign minister thanked CARICOM heads for rejecting the strengthening of the U.S. blockade against the country and the application of the Helms-Burton Act, as well as for their deep appreciation for Cuba's medical cooperation that for years has contributed to the well-being of its peoples. Shifting gears now, teachers in Colombia have begun a 48-hour strike to protest at the threats and attacks suffered by many of their colleagues. Their union is demanding that the government of Ivan Duque provides guarantees for teachers, a number of whom have been murdered as part of the paramilitary campaign against social and community leaders. Our correspondent Hernan Tobar is at the teachers' protest in Bogota.
About 350,000 teachers have stopped work in protest at the increasing violence in the country, which has affected them directly. There have been teachers murdered, threatened, and forced to leave their communities. To understand more about the situation that teachers are now facing in Colombia, let's talk to Nelson Alacon, who is the president of the teachers' union, FECOD. What is the reason for you to call this strike exactly?
The threats, attacks and murders of teachers are on the increase in Colombia, especially those who are leaders and activists in our trade union. So we are demanding that the government really implement effective policies to provide security and protection for all of us.
And how many teachers have been murdered so far this year?
Just this year, 2 teachers have been murdered, and more than 240 have received threats across the country.
So that gives you an idea of the situation for teachers in Colombia today. Teachers are now protesting here in Bogota and in many other towns and cities around Colombia. Here, the protesters will be marching to the Ministry of Labor to demand these guarantees for teachers in the face of the violence from armed paramilitary groups.
Our correspondent in Colombia. Now, coming up, we interviewed an international debt analyst on Argentina's current arrangement with the IMF. Stay with us for details.
Who's moving the chessmen? What interests motivate the actors behind each event? The board is deployed there. Critical move. Investigates every event from Monday to Friday. Only on Telesur.
Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has declared a national emergency or energy emergency after the U.S. government imposed unilateral sanctions on the Russian oil company Rosneft for trading in Venezuelan crude. President Maduro also created a presidential commission that will be tasked with transforming the oil industry due to the growing number of U.S. sanctions.
Yesterday, a new set of criminal sanctions, was imposed against our oil company and the Russian company Rosneft. We have rejected this batch of measures. During the last 3 years, a state oil company, PDVSA, has resisted, standing alongside the mobilized working class. The company has been fighting against these criminal sanction measures that aim to destroy PDVSA, which is the main company of all Venezuelans.
President Maduro has also called on the Venezuelan people to take to the streets and protest against the latest set of U.S. sanctions.
I ask all the people in Venezuela to mobilize for the defense of PDVSA, the defense of the workers of the oil industry of Venezuela. No more Trump, no more sanctions, no more blockades. Long live PDVSA.
We continue with our series, Failure of an Invasion. 1 year after the attempt by the United States and its chosen representative, Juan Guaido, to try to force so-called humanitarian aid across the Venezuelan border on February 23rd. Before they could do that, they had to create the figure of Guaido himself. Madeline Garcia looks back.
Three days after Nicolas Maduro was sworn in as president on January 10th, something strange happened. SEBIN, the Bolivarian intelligence service, arrested the opposition lawmaker Juan Guaido without any order.
This was an irregular situation where a group of officers acting on their own account carried out this unauthorized operation against Congressman Juan Guaido.
What was behind that event became clear 3 months later when the director of SEBIN, General Christopher Figuera, led the failed coup attempt of April 30.
This was someone who was practically unknown in the world of Venezuelan politics, much less outside Venezuela, a sort of clone of U.S. President Obama, who wanted to present himself as a successful young entrepreneur capable of putting everything in order and reordering Venezuelan politics.
The unknown Juan Guaido appeared on the international media scene, part of a marketing operation that carefully constructed his image. The day before President Nicolas Maduro appeared before the National Constituent Assembly to be formally recognized as the president of Venezuela.
Yesterday, we witnessed a show in which a group of corrupt and treacherous officers from SEBIN very strangely detained him. As soon as I find out about it, I ordered them to be disciplined.
This was the trigger for the strategy that had been developed to make visible the figurehead of the United States plan to put forward a shadow government.
Guaido's arrest was a false flag operation. There was another one a few days later, on January 21st, 3 days before Juan Guaido was to proclaim himself president. The country awoke to a declaration by a small group of soldiers who tried to make it look like an uprising of the Bolivarian National Armed Forces. Nothing could be further from the truth.
They already had their plan well worked out with what they call humanitarian aid. But since the armed forces were, as always, entirely at peace, and the country was at peace, they needed to create some kind of turmoil among the population to justify their subsequent actions.
You asked us to come out and defend the Constitution. Here we are. Here we are. Here we have the troops. Here we have the troops.
The calls to the street fell on deaf ears, but it was the preamble needed by the opposition, following instructions from the United States to stir up the atmosphere and justify what would come next. The intention was always to create a fictitious reality in the media, a permanent feature of the siege against Venezuela.
The opposition doesn't have a government plan to start with. That is why they are so desperate.
One aspect I think is very important, the positioning of the figure of Guaido to dominate the media, and that cannot be done overnight. That requires specific contracts and deals with the domestic and, above all, international media. Guaido is a figure who was tailor-made by the United States.
They tried everything in search of allies. They even tried Diosdado Cabello, the second most important leader of the revolution and vice president of the United Socialist Party of Venezuela. This image flew around the world. Juan Guaido heading for a meeting, which he later denied and continues to deny ever took place. This was on January 22nd, one day before Guaido swore himself in as the supposed president of Venezuela.
Let's confirm if that meeting took place and what you talked about.
I have a friend that says that even when you tell the truth, you lie.
Do you think the Constitution says anywhere that the National Assembly can overthrow a president? Do you believe that?
No, of course not, but...
And do you think we are going to let you off so easily?
No, of course not. You have the opportunity to decide and lead a process. Say what you have to say. We have the opportunity to lead this process. I am here so we can meet.
Lies and manipulation were at the center of the strategy, with the support of the United States and the promise that now they would put an end to the revolution and Nicolás Maduro. Only one thing was missing, an unconstitutional president to begin the invasion so often mentioned. So the next step would be for Juan Guaido to declare himself interim president of Venezuela. We will look at that in our next report.
Moving on into other news. Argentina's debt is unsustainable. That's what the International Monetary Fund has concluded after meeting government officials in Buenos Aires. President Alberto Fernandez celebrated the IMF announcement, which stated it wasn't economically or politically feasible for Argentina to pay back its loans. The IMF also supported President Fernandez's suggestion that his government first needs to focus on the social needs of the people. The IMF will now begin a new debt negotiation with the government. Earlier, we were joined by financial expert Eric Toussaint of the Campaign Against Third World Debt, or CADTM. He warned that the IMF must not be trusted, despite its claim that it agrees Argentina's debt is unsustainable in its current form.
I think we should be very cautious with this type of declaration from IMF, because, you know, they say the payment of the debt is unsustainable, but they will never accept to cut off a part of the debt from Argentina to the IMF. So they are asking the other creditors, the private creditors, to accept to reduce the debt, and I don't think they will accept. So my recommendation would be to the Argentinian government is to do what Rafael Correa did in 2007, 2008, just after being elected for the first time. He organized an audit commission of the debt to identify the illegal or illegitimate or odious part of the debt. In 2018, Mauricio Macri asked Donald Trump to put a pressure on the IMF to convince the IMF to give a credit of $57 billion to Mauricio Macri. It is the most important credit from the IMF in his history. And it was clear already in the summer 2018, when the IMF took this decision under the pressure of Donald Trump, that the debt was unsustainable. It's very important from the point of view of the interest of the people of Argentina to refuse to be submitted another time to the IMF and the imperialism. The repayment of Argentina to the private creditors is for the amount of 30 billion in 2020. So Argentina needs to suspend the payments.
Coming up, a look at a blocked military offensive against the Syrian government's forces. We'll tell you if the situation is escalating when we return.
Innovation, science, the technological breakthrough, and its influence in society.
Viajeros del saber, el futuro está aquí.
Atomen. Monday, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has hit out against remarks made by the country's last apartheid-era leader, F.W. de Klerk. Answering questions in Parliament, the president said apartheid was unquestionably a crime against humanity. During last week's State of the Nation address, the opposition economic freedom fighters protested at the presence of de Klerk, who had denied the system of racial segregation had been a crime against humanity.
So apartheid was so immoral in its conception and so devastating in its execution that there is no South African living today who is not touched by its legacy. I would even go on to say that to deny this, in my view, is treasonous.
Hundreds of Zimbabweans protested in the capital Harare on Wednesday against deteriorating living conditions. Protesters marched across the main streets of Harare, calling on the government to find solutions to the rising cost of living. Due to high inflation rates, Zimbabwean citizens have been struggling to afford basic services. The situation has been worsened by droughts, which affected the country in the past 3 years. The Russian Air Force has reportedly foiled a Turkish-backed military offensive against the Syrian army in Idlib province. It released aerial footage showing the attack, noting that the militants shelled the Syrian army's positions in an attempt to breach its defensive lines. Russia's defense ministry added that it contacted Ankara, which prompted Turkish forces to stop the artillery barrage. The militants had used armored vehicles and Turkish artillery in some areas. In Europe, at least 11 people have been shot dead in the German city of Hanau near Frankfurt. According to local media, a gunman first attacked people at a shisha bar in the city center before carrying out a similar strike at a bar nearby. The incident also left 4 people seriously injured. Police say the 43-year-old suspect died by suicide and believe the incident was motivated by xenophobia. France's powerful CGT labor union said they will no longer take part in discussions about how to fund the government's pension reform. The French Parliament is expected to debate and vote on President Emmanuel Macron's reforms on the first week of March. Several unions have called for a general strike on February 20th, and as in previous strikes, public transport will likely be affected. The U.S. Democratic Party held a 2-hour-long debate in which 6 candidates defended their bid to challenge Donald Trump for the upcoming elections. Among the topics discussed was healthcare, and Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders said the government has failed citizens by maintaining expensive medical costs while enriching multi-million-dollar companies.
UK can do it, France can do it, Germany can do it, all of Europe can do it. Gee whiz, somehow or another, we are the only major country on earth that can't do it. Why is that? And I'll tell you why. It's because last year the healthcare industry made $100 billion in profits. Pharmaceutical industry, top 6 companies, $69 billion in profit. And those CEOs are contributing to Pete's campaign and other campaigns up here.
And that brings us to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. For our viewers in Africa, remember you can find us on Starsat Channel 461 in South Africa and Channel 539 in Nigeria. And join us on social media for Telesur English. I'm Doris Polo. Thanks for watching.